Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching, and it's part 2 of my How to Paint HeroQuest series, and in this video I'm going to show you how I did the doors from the set. Now as I go through this series I'm going to break down the models into batches so that you're not painting too many models at once and getting demoralised, but you're doing enough to make it fast, and I'm going to break them down into models that share similar paints. And obviously all the doors makes common sense to do all at once, so that's what we're working on today. Now in terms of the base coats, you see I've sprayed them black with a real good thorough coat and then a Wraithbone spray over the top at a 45-degree angle so that we're still leaving some of that black showing through on the kind of underneath areas, but it'll be paler at the top. Now it's mostly going to be contrast paints, but you've seen there I've done a Retributor armour stage on the top of the door frames there, that kind of moulded face effect, and on the door handles. Now I'm moving from the brass now onto a Vallejo gunmetal colour because a nice difference between the metals on the door gives a bit more visual interest when you're doing it. Now you could do the metallics as a kind of non-metallic metal and pick a contrast colour, but I like how the proper metallic paints look in a preference to non-metallic metals, so that's just a personal one. Now when you're doing the hinges here on the doors, also there's rivets that run through the middle of the door and that's at the very top, so I use a smaller brush, drop some of that metallic onto the rivets. It's important when you're doing this metallic stage that you do a good coat and you cover all the white that's showing, because you don't want the white showing through on a metallic area because it just won't look like right, because obviously metal doesn't have that white showing through. Not such an issue if you have that happen with the next stages, but try and make sure none of it is showing because it just makes a sort of nicer effect. Now we've done the metallics, so we're moving on now to working on the stone, and we're using again all the next stages of contrast paint. So using the Black Legion, which is a colour that when it tones down onto that the white base, it starts showing through as like a grey black, so really suitable for using on the stones. Now when we're doing the stone, you want to cover a good coverage across the model, but avoid the areas where the plants are growing through. You don't have to be super precious, and if you do get some of this contrast paint onto the stems of the plant that's growing up, when we put the green over the top, it's just going to give a different tone of the green, a little bit darker. And that's not a problem, but you don't want it over, everywhere. Now I'm being quite careful to avoid the stalks and the stems, but I wasn't super careful about avoiding the leaves that are at the top, because you maybe want those slightly darker anyway. Now I got through some of the batch, as you can see some models there, and I kind of thought, hang on, what's going to look better? Is it going to look better putting the stone colour down and then the green for the plants? Or is it going to look better doing the green for the plants and then the stone? So I thought I'd experiment so that you can be a judge. I thought there might be a big difference, and then I could explain that on the video. So here I am just doing the green on all the stems and again on the leaves at the kind of top of the model. Now when you're putting this on here, you will find when you paint the stems that green leaches across the stem because it's quite raised. It'll settle into the drops and you will get some going across the stonework. But again, don't worry about that because once you put the grey on, it is going to cover over that. So try and be fairly neat, but you don't have to be too precious about what you're doing. Now here I'm again working on the ones I've already done the stonework on and then moving on to the green. And the same thing, you're going to find some areas where you put the stone colour down and it didn't quite settle in as close as you might have wanted to the stems. Don't worry about it, just go onto the stone a little bit, and you can see there as I've painted up the side where some of that black had covered the stem, and I'm now putting the green over the top, and even before it dries you can see 2 or 3 different tones on to the green, which is obviously the effect we're going for. It's quite nice, and you can see at the top there I'm painting it directly onto where we've painted the stonework, because that's where the leaves and things are on the model, and you can see it's sort of, you get multiple greens on there. So I'm not convinced which was the best way of doing it, whether it's better to do it the green first and then the stone colour, or like I'm seeing here, the stone then the green. It felt a little bit easier doing the stone and then the green on top afterwards, so that's just how it felt to me as I'm doing it, but obviously it's entirely dependent on what you want to do when you're painting your models. Now we have a comparison. On the left we have where I worked the green, then the stone. On the right is then stone and then the green. Really isn't much in it at all. I did find that when I did the green first, then put the stone on, I did go back to a couple of areas and put some green back on, especially on the leaves that are at the top, so probably quicker to do the stonework first and then work on the green. Now moving on, we're actually working on the wood of the door. So this is again another contrast paint, a wild wood, and we're painting this on here, and you can see how I've painted the rivets across the middle of the door and at the top. Now you want to get really into the edges, kind of thing, and get the brown as a really good coverage. Don't be too afraid if you cover over some of the rivets, because I found myself doing that quite often. What you can either do is repaint it later once it's dried, or wet your brush slightly, get the contrast paint off, wet your brush slightly, and then just run the tip of your brush with over the top of the rivet and just lift that contrast paint off. You've got plenty of time to do that before it dries. You don't have to rush to do that straight away. You can see here I've fully painted it. I'm just going back with that brush and taking that contrast just off the top of the rivet. You've got plenty of time on contrast paints because it takes a long time to dry. So we've done all the woodwork. And effectively, that's your base layers finished. Now what we're going to do is put a shade over the entire model. This again is a Games Workshop shader, Seraphim Sepia, and this is kind of a slightly dirty brown effect, which should help unify all the colours you've used so far. Now, this isn't my normal wash. If you watch a lot of my videos on my channel, you'll know I normally use like a similar sepia one, but it's a dirtier Vallejo wash. I don't want to dirty all the models too much because I think with the contrast paint, you want to still see the effect of those coming through, and this is just a gentle enough shade that will unify the colours without swamping all the detail you've already put on. So really good coverage over the entire model, including the base part. What I found here is there's no good way of holding these sometimes, so I got right down to the base and then I put the model down on my painting mat and then just put the wash around there, which meant my painting mat did get covered in a fair bit of wash doing this, but obviously that's no bad thing to have a messy painting mat. And that is it. That is the finished paint scheme. When it's all dried, I think all the colours show through nicely. There's a real nice aged dirty feel to here. There's some really good different tones showing on the rocks and things there, and I did do a matte varnish on top of these afterwards, and again that helped to tie together the colours as well quite nicely and take the shine off that you see in there with the models just drying. Yeah, I think a real simple, real effective scheme, and hopefully you like what you're seeing. If you do, follow along, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff, and there'll be other videos following in the HeroQuest series showing you how I did the rest of the set.